right, good morning. I'm going to wait a few seconds just to make sure the streaming is working. It looks like it is. My name is Samantha Mirabal. I'm with the Melco's application team, and today we're going to be going over dry fits and how to best conquer those. They're always a challenge when you get into embroidery to take these stretchy things and get lettering that comes out crisp and clean without a whole lot of puckering on it. So we're going to go over the best practices, tips, and tricks for making sure they're successful for you. Okay, so let me check. Can someone comment if you hear me? Actually, the video disappeared. There it is. All right, I just want to make sure. All right, well, I assume it works. If it doesn't, hopefully someone will call me. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. When we're working with dry fit shirts, one of the things that we want to look at is what type of stabilizers we're going to use. You know, these shirts tend to be really thin, stretchy. They cause a lot of puckering, and to help prevent that, what you want to do is make sure you're using appropriate stabilizers and you're hooping it correctly. So what stabilizers are good? We have things like this, which is a no-show mesh, and I'm just going to switch over so you can see it. This is a no-show mesh that comes in multiple colors, black and white. They also have a cut performance. Each one of these, Madeira who makes the no-show, will say about 7,000 to 8,000 stitches per layer that you use. So rather than doing that, I've gotten into the habit of always using two. So whether it be one layer of the no-show and one layer of something like this, which is a 3.1 ounce, that's kind of my preferred combo. Sometimes this heavy cutaway, though, can cause the design to be heavy and almost make it look like you have a badge hanging out here because you can see the ghost of the cutaway behind it. So in cases like that, sometimes it's better to either go with 2 layers of the no-show or a layer of no-show and a layer of the cut performance or 2 layers of cut performance. Like I said, my preference is to always use 2 layers. That way I don't have to worry about do I have enough or not. You know, I don't generally look at the stitch count. I just try to hoop and go. So with those, I'll use 2. The other technique with the stabilizer is when you're going to hoop them, first thing you'd want to do is notice there's a green to it by twisting them so that they're kind of at different orientations towards one another. What that allows is it stabilizes a little bit better so that you don't get any stretch in any direction. Okay. Now, not only can you do that, but the name of the game for quality embroidery on these stretchy type materials is going to be to make sure everything is held still. So to do that, not only do you twist your layers like this when you layer up your stabilizers, but you also want to use a spray adhesive. There's a whole bunch on the market. The 505 is probably my preferred. I have this because where I buy my thread, I can get this for cheap, so I usually keep some of this on hand, but any of these spray adhesives work really well. And how you want to use those is you want to take your whatever stabilizer you've chosen to use, and don't spray your garment, spray the stabilizer. All right, so you'll take this, you'll spritz it, and remember, a little goes a long way, and I tried this earlier and almost sprayed myself in the face. So you just want to spray a little bit, and then what you're going to do is take your second layer and just stick it to that. Now you've got a little sandwich with these stuck together. Then you would take this, again, spray it, just a little bit. A little goes a long way, and I do not recommend spraying this around your machines. It gets everywhere the more you use it. So I actually keep a box, like a cardboard box that I eventually throw away, that I lay the stabilizer in and spritz it in there. So then what you do is take this, which has this adhesive on it, and stick it on the inside of the shirt. So I usually turn the shirts inside out, lay them flat on the table so that you can make sure you don't have any stretch to it. And then you just stick this down onto your garment and smooth it out where you're going to put the logo. The reason you do that is now you've kind of glued all those layers together so they can't move. When you have everything stable and not moving, you're going to end up having it held still so the embroidery can go in nice and clean. Okay, so like I said, there's a bunch of different options that you have. So you can do the Gunold, I keep that on hand. Madeira makes one that works pretty well. Odif is another brand. I think Elmer's makes one. There's a bunch of them. So just find whatever spray adhesive. 505 is nice because it doesn't gum up your needles. It holds very well. But it's really whatever you have on hand works. All right, so after you've got your stabilizer and your shirt inside out, you've secured this, kind of glued everything together. Now what? Well, you want to make sure you hoop it nice and tight. Okay, so it's drum tight. The one thing you do not want to do is hoop it and then go, oh, I have a bubble in my fabric. So now you start pulling on the fabric. Don't do that. What you're going to end up doing is stretching the grain. So as you end up sewing, once you're done, it might look pretty in the hoop, but when you're done, you release it, it's all going to kind of shrink back up, and you're going to get those puckers and whatnot because the material is pre-stretched. So make sure that you hoop it tight, but it's hoop and go. So you hoop it, so if it's not right, unhoop it and hoop again. All right, so by having everything stuck together with a little bit of spray adhesive and then hooping it tight, now you've minimized its ability to move around. Okay, and holding things still is key. When you have small letters or small details, you know, a lot of these dry fit shirts have a texture to them. So by using a topper on, you know, a water soluble stabilizer like Solvay on top, that kind of helps hold the stitches up out of the loft so that you get a nice clean sew out, particularly when you have small details. So using a topper often helps. And then one of the more important things, not only is your stabilizer and hooping, but also make sure you have appropriate digitizing for your dry fits. Some of the keys to that are going to be minimizing or eliminating most of your underlay and reducing your stitch count as much as you can. And why is that? Well, when you look at your underlay, right, so these are different ones. So I've got a center walk drawn here. I've got an edge walk, zigzag, and double zigzag. You want to minimize as much underlay because if you remember, what is an underlay for? It's going to control motion. So you're holding your fabric and stabilizer together so it can't move around. Well, we use spray adhesive, right? So we've kind of minimized the ability for things to move around by gluing all the layers together. The fabric's glued to the stabilizer, which is glued to the second layer of stabilizer. So by doing that, we've already controlled the motion of the fabric. Well, dry fit stuff it's not like a minky blanket that has a lot of loft that we have to tack down. So you don't need a whole lot of underlay to compact loops of a towel or things like that because it's a really kind of flat, thin material. So there's no need for this sort of zigzag or double zigzag. So by minimizing to just a center walk or an edge walk, if you're dealing with wider columns, you're kind of minimizing your stitch count through there. Okay. Now, to me it makes sense of why you do that. Like if these fabrics tend to be slick, they tend to move around. So we've glued it. But if I'm doing a whole lot of stitching underneath that, what am I doing? Well, I'm going to put a stitch here, and as my machine's moving at a high speed this way, this hole is going to try to shift over. Same when I come here. I'm going to make a stitch. Now I'm going to be moving at a high speed this way. That hole's going to try to shift in. So things are going to try to move around. When you have movement on these types of fabrics, you end up with puckers. You end up with kind of that weird, you know, where everything's pulling in, which is what we're trying to avoid. So by not putting heavy underlay in there, you can help minimize the risk that you're going to introduce that into your designs. Okay, the other thing is to look at your densities. All right, so I would suggest for your underlay going with a center walk for things that are narrow, and edge walk if you're getting on the wider end of things, but try to minimize as much as possible for your underlay. Now, kind of going up from there, the next thing you would want to do is look at your densities. By reducing your densities, and what I mean by that, it's really increasing your densities, by reducing your stitch count, you're taking stitches away, taking opportunity away for things to shift. All right, so here I just have 3 little illustrations showing you the difference. So you can see, you know, a lot of people will use a 3.5-ish for most kind of satin stitches, and you can see by going to a 4, 4.0, 4.5, you're spreading your stitches out from one spot to another to make it a little bit bigger, but, you know, looking across there, they're not that much different from where the stitches are going. Okay, but you're decreasing your stitch count significantly. All right, you can see just the percentage-wise, as you increase your density, your stitches are going to go down. So whatever you can do to kind of take out some of that density will make it easier for you to sew on these types of fabrics. Okay, so it's particularly when you get small, like anything 1/4 inch to, you know, 1/4 inch type lettering. When you go there, staying with a 3.5 on this type of fabric or 3.7 somewhere in there is going to cause you issues. It will look just as nice in most cases if you go up to 4.5. somewhere between 4.5 type density, so that you're just minimizing your stitch count and you're having that ability for it all to go in. I mean, that's really what dryware boils down to. Hold it still. All right, so we do that by making our little stabilizer sandwich and using some sort of spray adhesive, and then minimizing our stitch count and underlays. So there, oops, all right, everyone can hear me. Does anyone have any questions? All right, I was just looking over on the feed to see if there's any questions here. Good morning. So it's, they're pretty basic to be able to do them. Now, what the main issues you end up seeing is kind of that puckering by overstretching these when you go to hoop them, right? So don't overstretch. And again, you can avoid that by turning it inside out, applying your stabilizer directly to the shirt with a spray adhesive. That way, when you go to hoop it, it's not going to move. It's already glued to your stabilizer. As long as you're not pulling on the fabrics, you're all set. Okay. And make sure you're layering them, minimizing your stitch count, and that's really all there is to it. I get a lot of questions on what is the best stabilizer. It really depends on your design, right? So if you have something that's really heavy, you're going to need more layers, right? If you're trying to put 18,000 stitches into a dry fit, well, maybe you want to see if you can simplify the design to get rid of some of those stitches, but you're definitely going to need more than one layer. Like I said, I've gotten into the habit a long time ago of always going with 2 layers of stabilizer as a minimum, and just to make sure everything's nice and secure. Okay. And that's about all there is to it. I mean, really. You can always add the cutaway. The only time I find myself taking the cutaway off of the designs or out of the mix is when the shirt is just so thin that even when you cut the stabilizer really close to the design, it's almost so heavy that the design kind of either leaves this weird badge so that you can see the stabilizer through the shirt. And in those cases, most customers will find that ugly and not want it. So in those, going with these lighter weight no-shows or the cut performance, which is a really nice woven. And again, with that cut performance, it's got a grain to it. So by alternating them so that they're kind of at different orientations relative to one another, you can get better stability across your design. All right. Hello. Yeah, oh, I forgot about that. Yes, center out is the other thing that's absolutely critical. Sorry, I almost got ahead of myself. So the reason that is, when you go from a design, you always want to push out away from things. All right. So if you think about it, if I'm sewing in one direction, I'm going to be plowing that fabric along the way, which is going to move fabric. By sewing center out, you're always sewing your stitches so that any push is going into an area that's not going to be sewn, that you're not going to sew over. So center out for dry fit is absolutely critical to making sure that your design is going to look nice. So it's the same way with hats. So if you have a design, you always want to sew it center out because you're pushing away from things that cannot move. Center of a hat, it's easy to imagine. You've got the brim, that center seam and the brim on the bottom. Those don't move where the fabric attaches there. So you're always pushing away so that you're sewing without plowing that fabric towards something. And when I mean plowing, I don't know if you can visualize it, but if you're pushing on something, you'll eventually get ripples, right? This is really bad. There you go. Anyway, when you push it, you get ripples. So as you're sewing, you're going to be shifting things along. So if you're going from one side to the other, you'll end up creating problems, whereas going center out makes sure that you're not inducing those sorts of issues into your designs, into your sew outs. Yes. So there was a question, center out on dry fit shirts? Yes, absolutely. Okay, let me see. I had notes that I dropped on the floor right before that started. All right, so that's about it. Yeah. Center out, make sure you're doing an edge run or a center walk for your underlay. You're reducing your stitch count, you're hooping tight, you're making sure you use the right layers, right stabilizers. Make sure you use things like this, the K100 or 505. I like better than this one. It's just what I had handy. All right. Any questions that you guys have? The video does get posted after this. It'll be available both on Facebook and on YouTube. And if you type in questions on Facebook throughout the day, we'll try to check on it and make sure that we get any questions answered. But it's, don't let the dry fit or the stretchy things scare you off. They're really not that bad. Practice. If you take one and you end up scrapping it, use that same item and just keep on sewing around it, hoop it in different locations so that you can learn the technique to it. It really is quite simple once you get the hang of it, of just, making sure you're using appropriate stabilizer and sticking it all together. Once you minimize its ability to move around, you sew from center out and minimize your stitch count, you'll be set. It just sews in a nice way. All right. How do you feel about sticky back as opposed to spray adhesive? Personally, I can't stand sticky back stuff. I know a lot of people love it. Me, I don't like the stuff. It tends to gum up my needles, but that's also, I tend to buy the cheapest sticky back I can find. When I've used really expensive stuff from the quilt shops, it actually works well. It's just, I don't like the gumming of the needles, because when the needles gum up, then you end up with, what's it called? When the needles gum up, you end up with this goo on the needles, which causes thread breaks. And thread breaks are aggravating. So I try to stay away from them. The other thing with the sticky backs, they also tend to be tearaways, and you really want to stay with cutaway stabilizers when dealing with dry fits. Okay, so I find it much better to use a cutaway and a spray adhesive just to avoid that gumming. It's like I said, as soon as you can see it. If you sew on particularly the cheap tearaway gummy type sticky backs, you sew, if you look at your needles after you're done, you'll usually have this goo ball kind of stuck up on there, and you can clean it off with alcohol, but I have no time or interest of doing that personally, so it's not something I do. The technique that I saw that I've been using for a while now and dealing with, have you ever noticed designs, particularly large fill designs, will kind of potato chip on your shirt? All right, so after you wash it. So you go to wash it, you wash and dry. When it comes out, it's all curled like a potato chip. To help with that, I've saw it on some groups, tried it. It works great. You can take them and heat press them on a heat press, not an iron. So you need some good pressure, some good heat. I usually do mine around 320, same that you would use heat transfer vinyl. 315, 320 is what I do mine. But when you heat press it, it seems to set the threads so that you can eliminate that curl. And I've had shirts that have been completely potato chipped, and every time I take it out, iron it, and go about my day. And they've been sewn for a while. After I saw that, heat pressed them, now they come out pretty decent every time. Okay. Yeah, there's a question, where's the setting to change for a design from sewing middle out? So how do you do that? Which, when you're working with those, lettering is the only thing that, if you go into Design Shop, so I'll go open it if I get out of this thing. And let's switch over so we can see my screen. All right. So in Design Shop, in lettering, when you type in, all right, so I've got basic name. If you double click on it, down here you'll see it's center out. All right, so when you do it center out, now it's going to go NTHA and then back the other way, right? So it will sew it center out. That's only for lettering. When you look at actual designs, you have to plan that out yourself and digitize it so that it's sewing from center out. So you have to think about the pathing, how you're going to get from one spot to another, so that it's going to sew this way and then that way, or whichever way you want, top to bottom, side to side. But you have to manually do that. Okay, what other questions? How long would you heat press for? I usually do it for the same that I would do heat transfer vinyl in, so I usually do it for about 15 to 20 seconds. That's just because that's what I have my heat presses set to. So, but try it. I've found it works really well. There's several folks in the groups that have always suggested it, and I saw it several years ago and have been doing it ever since, and it really does flatten it out, and it seems to hold even through wash cycles. Okay, let's see, what other questions are there? More comments. So I'm trying to look at the comments, and they don't all want to show up. All right. Any other questions before we call it? All right. No one's texting me from Melco? No. All right. Well, you guys have a good evening, hopefully, or a good afternoon, I guess. It's really not evening time yet. Hope this was helpful for everyone, and don't be scared of it. It really isn't that hard. Play around with them. You know, it really boils down to making sure you've digitized it right and that you're using appropriate materials. And from there, I mean, just go for it. It's I find every sew out ends up being a learning experience, right? So you can always learn something from what you're working on. Sew it out, try it, you know, sketch out, keep yourself a little book of things you like, things you don't like. So, hey, this didn't work, never do that again. Or that, hey, this turned out really good. What was your formula, if you will, for how you created that? You'll find that as you build that portfolio of what you like and your preferences are, you know, things become easier as you do them. All right, so just keep at it. You know, the more you do, the easier it becomes. All right, so performance wear. Hopefully that was helpful for y'all. Let's take one more look, see if there's any other questions. I don't see any. All right, well, you guys have a good afternoon. Bye.